along with that terror. Guy McPherson, he is an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. He's professor emeritus at the University of Arizona with works published on more than a dozen books and hundreds of scholarly articles. Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamal. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Absolutely. So we've been discussing, or trying to get into these conversations basically on climate change. And you are my foremost expert on that particular issue because people who considered your proclamations extreme have found themselves in this kind of weird, precarious spot, perched at the edge of the world, seeing that world go to pot in a similar way to which you have been describing in your writings. So can you give us just a brief take, just so people who don't necessarily know who you are or not up to date with your research, what is the thesis? What is the main summary of the work regarding climate change that's out of control, or runaway climate change?
Right, great question. I'm a conservation biologist, and like other conservation biologists, I primarily focus on habitat. Habitat for other animals, habitat for plants, habitat for human animals. And it appears to me that because we are in the midst of abrupt and irreversible climate change, and that was the title of one of my recent peer-reviewed articles, Earth is in the midst of abrupt irreversible climate change. Because we're there, it appears to me that we are going to lose habitat for our favorite species in the not too distant future. And I suspect that that has already been triggered by COVID-19. Because of the shutdowns and slowdowns in industrial activity, I suspect that sometime around this fall, maybe next fall, we will experience profound crop failure sufficient to cause the collapse of civilization, what we call civilization, and therefore, because of the warming that occurs after that, there won't be any habitat for humans. This is not what I want to have happen, obviously. I'm rather enjoying my life, but I don't see any way around it at this point.
So, wait, so you're saying basically that's fascinating. So let me ask this one. How does COVID-19 do that? I mean, because before COVID-19 hit, would you have made that argument or made that case, or COVID-19 is creating a new reality in which this becomes more real?
I actually made this case about 13 years ago on my blog, in the third post on my blog, which was in late August, as I recall, nearly 13 years ago. And I indicated that we were headed for a world with a lot more widespread disease. One of the consequences of widespread disease, such as COVID-19, is the reduction in industrial activity around the planet. And we saw this first in China, especially around Wuhan, where the outbreak was first reported. A lot of people were staying indoors. A lot of people weren't going to work anymore. And as a result, there was this huge clearing of the air in a pretty large region around Wuhan. Next was India, where the same phenomenon was observed. Then it took place in a large area throughout Eurasia, and most recently in the northeastern United States. When people don't go to work, don't go to the factories, industrial activity is alleviated, it's reduced, and so these aerosols associated with industrial activity that are produced by civilization, the same as greenhouse gases are produced by civilization. Well, when civilization slows or stops in an area, those aerosols fall out of the sky. They've been serving as something of an umbrella to keep the sunlight from ever striking Earth. So, interestingly enough, we're in this paradox that if we maintain industrial activity, we keep cranking the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We all know that that has negative consequences for warming the planet. But at the same time, if we slow industrial activity, we lose a lot of those aerosols that have been protecting the cool nature of the planet. We're already at the highest temperature ever experienced by human beings on Earth, where we have passed the 2 degree Celsius baseline temperature above the 1750 baseline. So there's a lot going on. A recent paper in Science Advances by Raymond and colleagues indicates that we're already experiencing wet bulb temperatures at various places around the globe. This from May 8th, 2020. Wet bulb temperatures that are lethal to human beings. And they point out in their article in Science Advances that this was not expected for another 80 years, because of course we don't expect anything to go wrong until 2100. That's what the IPCC has been telling us all this time, right? But as it turns out, by warming the planet at such a rapid rate over the course of the last 270 years, we're producing consequences. And we live in the age of consequences. We're there. It's unfortunate.
Well, I'm trying to get specifically though to how the COVID connection, because I acknowledge. Okay, just to give people a slight bit of background, and tell me if I'm wrong with this, but I do want to get to the COVID connection. Basically, the argument is the things that we put into the atmosphere have two consequences that contradict one another. One has to do with a global warming effect. That's the effect that most people talk about, where you have a warming of the world based on the blanket that's created by the particles that we put in, either methane, carbon, or whatever. It's just greenhouse gases that we put in that blocks or traps in heat to the country or to the world.
Exactly.
On top of that, those gases also create a global dimming effect, which lowers the temperature. And if we get rid of those items that lower the temperature, we're going to see a spike, a remarkable increase in a short period of time. I want to make sure I said that correctly, but on top of that, how does that directly relate to COVID-19 and the spike in COVID-19 cases in regards to us seeing a pandemic?
Right. So one minor change there. It's not it's the soot and aerosol particles that are cooling the planet, not gases. But that's a minor issue, okay? So at the same time, and this comes especially from burning, quote, low-quality coal. The so-called clean coal actually has less of these particulates, less of these aerosols than, quote, regular coal does. So what's the connection to COVID-19? COVID-19 slowed industrial activity. Starting in Wuhan, people weren't going to work anymore. If they aren't going to work, they aren't cranking up the factories. If they aren't cranking up the factories to produce cars or license plates or headlights or whatever it is they're producing, that causes a reduction in industrial activity. As a result, they're burning a lot less coal. When you and I stay at home, we use relatively little energy to carry out our daily lives. So we go to the grocery store once every week or two. We burn a little carbon in the process of doing so. We stay at home, even running the air conditioner, whatever. That produces relatively few of these aerosols that go up and cool the planet. But big time industry, think of what used to be the Iron Belt in a large area in the northeastern United States. Think of what is now China, where they use coal to produce all these smartphones and car parts and refrigerators and every conceivable thing. Well, if the demand for all those things is down because nobody's going to work, nobody has any money, so they can't afford to buy things, what's the result? One result is very clear skies, beautifully clear skies that have been reported in places like China and India and Italy and throughout Eurasia. But those clear skies have a cost. They are not blocking the incoming sunlight. That's what COVID-19 does, is it causes a lot of people to stay at home because they're sick or because the factory is closed. We have these relatively large-scale shutdowns where for a while basically nothing was open except grocery stores and pharmacies. And in Belize, where I lived for about 2.5 years, they shut down everything, and everything is still shut down. Nobody's going anywhere. You can't even go to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, nothing. If you aren't growing your own food, you're starving. So the link to COVID-19 is the same as the link to any other pandemic or large-scale disease or any other activity that causes a reduction in industry. So if we reduce the amount of industry, we reduce the amount of coal burned, primarily. All those other other fossil fuels are involved as well. But mostly it's about coal being burned to produce energy. And if we reduce the amount of coal burned, we get the clean skies we have seen in places like China and India and even the United States. And again, those clear skies as a result of the aerosols having dropped out of the atmosphere may seem like really good news, and they're beautiful in the beginning. I mean, people are seeing mountains they have never seen before, literally, from cities. But bear in mind that comes at a cost, and the cost is an increased amount of radiation, of sunlight striking the Earth, therefore warming the Earth very rapidly. Does that make sense?
This is absolutely, yeah. Guy, this is Shane here. Yeah, great to meet you. Great to have you on the show. I had a quick question, actually. We're talking about these issues. There are, as far as I can tell, a lot of people are worried about the climate. You seem, though, particularly pronounced in your level of confidence about the destruction of the human habitat. What do you think you see that other people don't?
I'm a conservation biologist, so I think I understand habitat much better than other people. The three pillars on which conservation biology is built are habitat, extinction, and speciation. Speciation is when a new species comes into existence and describes the forebearers for those species. Extinction is when the last individual of a species dies. And habitat is almost always the cause for the death of that last individual of a species and for the entire species. Once you lose habitat, you're done. And we are losing habitat for Homo sapiens around the globe as a result of increased heat, increased humidity. We've long known that a warmer planet is a wetter planet. And we're starting to now observe the kinds of consequences that have been forecast for a long time by people who have been studying greenhouse gases and their impacts on Earth.
All right, that is the voice of Guy McPherson. Another quick question, actually. As a conservation biologist, I'm curious, are you familiar with Alan Savory, the sort of rancher dude working on reversing desertification? Have you heard of this guy?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, my early research in graduate school was dedicated to pointing out the nonsense he was producing.
Interesting. Okay, we can come back on that. Very glad to carry out that conversation on the other side. You were listening to Guy McPherson. He's an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. We will be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Peer into the future. With Political Misfits on Thursdays, where we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. I'm tuned, baby. Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
And we are back again. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're about to get into a very interesting conversation, as we've been doing so often so far, with Guy McPherson, internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. I will also quickly direct people, if you want to follow Guy on Twitter, you can. It's at Guy, Guy _ McPherson. You can also check out his writing, his other work, at GuyMcPherson.com, spelled the same way, no underscore, nothing funny in that, just GuyMcPherson.com. Again, we're talking with Guy. Guy, we're talking about Alan Savory there. I've been interested in this guy's work for a while. What do you think he gets so wrong? Briefly, maybe we can just set up, if you would, what his take is and where you see it going so wildly wrong.
Yeah, his take and much of what he says is actually correct. His take is that if we run a bunch of livestock in relatively small areas instead of spreading them out in very large areas. Think of the American West when it was first settled by white people. We put livestock over thousands of acres, rounded them up after a year or two. It was very low-intensity livestock grazing. What Savory proposes is high-intensity livestock grazing in much smaller pastures. And what that does is it allows the rancher to get to know the livestock individually. So they know this steer, and they know this heifer, and they know this cow, and they know this bull. And so they pay closer attention to what's going on with those animals. They can detect when something is going wrong with the animals, when they have a disease or something like that. Okay, so that's the easy part. The part that most people don't understand is, one, introducing livestock into North America was never a good idea. There is no analog for anything resembling livestock in North America. As a consequence, many species have gone extinct because here's this new keystone dominant species that is rapidly changing the habitat for thousands of other species, destroying habitat for thousands of other species, and as a consequence, those species are going extinct. Second point, Savory believes that by having a bunch of cattle out there churning the earth, this will improve infiltration and subsequent percolation of precipitation into the soil. That's been disproven repeatedly by range scientists and field ecologists. It doesn't make any sense, in fact, from the physics point of view, from a soil physics point of view. If you churn up the soil, what that does is make for smaller particles of soil, and they block infiltration and percolation pathways for the precipitation. So instead of improving soil water plant dynamics, what livestock are doing is destroying soil plant water dynamics and creating deserts in what used to be well-functioning, what we would call healthy grasslands. And so those are the major problems, are that he fails to recognize the physical changes on the soil and the consequent changes for the plant soil water relationships. And as a result, the impact is very frequently, in fact almost always, negative, and he also fails to acknowledge that introducing a new species, especially a big organism like livestock, into a habitat is not always a good idea. It doesn't have the desired consequences. And these things have been pointed out basically since he started with the idea in the late 1970s, introducing livestock into North America. And he was basically run out of Africa for his constant promoting of ideas that were not working there.
Very interesting. Yeah, a lot more we could talk about there, I'm sure, and I would push back in certain ways. I grant, however, that you sort of, just by default, would know more about this than I do, so I want to just thank you for sort of registering your opinion, or we can come back to that later. Maybe if we get you back on, I don't want to hog the conversation too much with that topic. I do want to turn slightly. What is your take on using iron fertilization of phytoplankton for carbon sequestration? Basically, the idea is you take tankers of iron out into the ocean. It finally sort of finely minced is another way to look at it, where you have lots of little tiny particles of iron. Then you would drop those in the ocean. That would be the sort of missing bottleneck in the development of phytoplankton. A bunch of phytoplankton would be born, it would grow, and then you would do this in a part of the ocean where there would be a downdraft that carries those phytoplankton to the bottom of the ocean, effectively capturing carbon. What is your take on that idea?
It sounds great, and it's a classic example of, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. This was actually attempted by a rogue scientist. One, it violates international law, and so this rogue scientist in, I believe, southwestern Canada tried this experiment, and it failed. In fact, it produced the opposite of the expected response. So This is the problem when we try to mess with systems that we don't fully understand. And I think this is a classic example of somebody going out and trying to mess with a system. We expect a certain outcome. Let's do relatively small scale, and this is many years ago. We could have performed small scale experiments and then ratcheted those up to medium scale experiments. We didn't have to go right to the ocean right away. So, the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, apparently that doesn't apply to some scientists. yeah, and clearly harm was done in that case.
Is it an issue of desperation?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please finish. I'm sorry.
No. Absolutely, it's a matter of desperation.
Oh.
And
Yeah. Is there any science that has up to this point been, let's say, a beneficial thought in
Well,
trying to get out of this quagmire between, not doing anything in industrial activity going down, rapidly rising in temperature, versus just kind of sitting here and just kind of accepting it all?
One, acceptance is a gift. And two, and perhaps more importantly, I'm working with a scientist at the Roland Institute out of Harvard. And his idea is called MEERS reflection, MEERS, reflection. And it focuses on creating mirrors that will reflect back the incoming sunlight to counter effect the result of the loss of aerosols. So if we're getting an increased heating, and apparently we are as a result of the loss of the aerosol masking effect, then one thing we can do, the simple thing we can do, is use a set of mirrors to reflect that sunlight back out into space. So this is an idea that has been in development in the laboratory for about a year. I've been working with Dr. Ye Tao at the Roland Institute, and I think it's the best thing, the best shot we have, and it's been tried at the small scale in the laboratory and at the medium scale in the Bay, but there's not enough money to run this thing. He's got about 15 undergraduate students who are volunteering their work this summer on this project. If we could pour a bunch of money and get a bunch of interest in the MEERS reflection project being conducted by Dr. Ye Tao, I think we would at least be pursuing the best case alternative at this point. Desperate times call for desperate measures. We're certainly there. And I see no downside to employing MEERS. It might not work. It might be too late. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think it's the best shot we have at this point, and that's why I'm working with him on that project.
So here's one of the things that's sort of troubling and confusing about this whole thing to me. Isn't that itself a sort of desperate, isn't that a big change in the atmosphere if you're going to try this, even though it's going to be implemented on a local scale? You're not going to see the wider effects as the world reaches whatever level of homeostasis it does in response to that small change. If we were to implement that, you were to see some local gains, and then you were to implement that more widely. Isn't that, to the point you were making earlier about the iron fertilization, just another sort of unknown foray into this area that could have dramatically varying consequences depending on how it goes?
It could be. The difference here is that this is not one rogue scientist going out and conducting, quote, research at a large scale without doing the smaller scale and intermediate steps. Dr. Tao is an excellent engineer. He's actually thought ahead and is implementing the smaller scale experimentation that needs to be done. I think we need to get a bunch more people on board with this idea and start putting some money into it. I'm not saying it will work, but if it doesn't, I think we are going to lose habitat even faster for human beings, and I'm not a big fan of that happening. So, yes, it's a classic catch-22. Is there a way out? This is what I think might be a way out. I'm not saying it is a way out, and so I think as a result, it's worth a try. That's all. I think it's worth a try. I think it's worth getting a bunch of scientists on board and having the conversation.
With all of the lack of an industrial activity during the COVID-19 thing from around the world, you made the point that you were able to, basically people could see, outside their window, it was like, whoa, there's a mountain there, there's a building there that I never knew was there because of the smog that was in the atmosphere. Have you been able, or have people been recording a substantial temperature increase that would not necessarily be here otherwise were it not for the lack of industrial activity over the recent weeks?
Yes, they have, and a recent paper indicates there are 15,000 weather stations in the United States that have indicated warmer and wetter temperatures, warmer and wetter conditions than, quote, normal or than expected. And that paper just came out yesterday. I don't have it right offhand with me, but I can send it to you so you can include in the show notes if you would like.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. Because all of the stuff, to some degree, are hypotheses. And hypotheses have to basically line up to real-world phenomena, otherwise it's just a guess. And so I appreciate you sending me that. I mean, because I think that's a big deal. It goes to this thing of validating your hypothesis in regards to aerosols being in the sky cutting down the temperature and the greenhouse raising the temperature and these kinds of things going tandem with one another. Guy,
right,
we're
and
going to have to leave, but where can people find more of your work?
Thank you. And I should point out that that data set is from the United States, where we've been collecting weather data for a very long time. So we have 15,000 weather stations we can tap into. That's not the case in more slowly developing countries or regions. You can find all my work at guymcpherson.com. And I'm on most of the social media, but I just announced this morning that I'm jumping off of essentially all social media except YouTube in the near future. So you can continue to find my work at guymcpherson.com, Nature Bats Last. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys today, and I'll look forward to another time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. This is very interesting. Again, a lot more here to talk about. I'm also, we talk about these things. This is a psychological hurdle I'm sure you face with practically everybody you discuss these issues with. There is an inherent resistance to even facing the idea by a lot of people. And then on the other hand, I also see this. I see from people who probably don't know nearly as much as you about these issues, an over-readiness to accept that things are just messed up. We're all just screwed. Things are over. It's a weird sort of dualism thing. I don't mean to put it too much in a binary, but I see people in both of those camps. I could see people going to both of those psychological extremes. In the last maybe 20 or 30 seconds, because we're about to wrap up, what do you think about that issue?
I couldn't agree more. The primary responses to my work have been defamation, betrayal, plagiarism, isolation, rejection, derision. So, because I've been connecting a few dots and pointing out the science that other people are producing, I have come under serious scrutiny, we'll say, to put it mildly. And so I can understand why people wouldn't want to go down that path. But on the other hand, what if it is as bad as I'm indicating? What if it is as bad as the evidence I cite is indicating? Well, that tells me that we need to do something a little different, because business as usual is not working. So that's where we're at, and I'm willing to try something new.
Guy.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to have to close it out. I just want to say thank you again. Even though we disagree on some things, those are disagreements. I'm hoping we can work out on the show. We can work out on the future, and it's a shame. It's a damn shame that people like yourself who are pushing these things, who have a legitimate perspective, who are coming at it with the scientific perspective, we're getting pushed out for reasons that have, as far as I can tell, nothing to do with science. So thank you again for joining us. Hopefully, we can have you back on soon. And good work. Keep up your independence.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have another great hour coming up. You're listening to the most disruptive show in the multiverse, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in just a minute.
Very good. How'd you feel about that?
That was fine.
Yeah?
It's fine.
It was fine?
I don't always have the perfect thing to say when I want to say it.
It was good. Did I help or did I hinder?
You helped a lot.
All right, good.
You're not completely worthless.
See, I help.
You're a good helper.